Shalom WJC family. It's time for our weekly Torah Talk. This week in synagogue we'll read Parshat Tetzaveh, but I'd like to talk about the special Shabbat that it is, Shabbat Zachor. Zachor is always the Shabbat immediately before Purim, and Zachor means remembrance or remember. And on this day we are commanded to read a special maftir. It's a mitzvah to read a special maftir that remembers Amalek. And we read a special passage that from another part of the Torah that says, remember what Amalek did to you when you were traveling in the desert and you were weak and they attacked your flanks. And the reason we do this, presumably, is that Haman, the wicked, genocidal, Jew-hating character of the Megillah, is described as an Amalekite. Now, there are no Amalekites anymore in this day and age. Literally, the people of Amalek has disappeared into the human family tree. However, Amalek took on this spiritual meaning that, like all Antisemites, are descendants spiritually of Amalek and of the likes of Haman. You'll often hear comparisons or Hitler referred to as an Amalekite. And while this is an important part, and obviously in this day and age with anti-Semitism on the rise and Jew hatred and attacks, horrible, bloody, murderous attacks on Jews all around the world, from New York to Australia, in Europe, and in Israel itself. All kinds of terrible attacks have taken place over the last couple of years. And so it's important to talk about anti-Semitism, but some rabbis, when they teach about this, it's not anti-Semitism that they necessarily say is the problem. And they instead say that what's Amalek is really about is how we as Jews make ourselves vulnerable to anti-Semitism. And so we can look at the Megillah itself, and many rabbis have pointed to different things in the story that indicate that we were vulnerable to attack by the mainstream. Lots of rabbis talk about assimilation in Shushan. And Jews were kind of blending in and hiding their identity. There wasn't Jewish pride. Jews were afraid to tell people what they stood for and what was special and beautiful about their faith and their peoplehood. And by hiding, like Esther hid her identity, we kind of allowed room for people to fill that vacuum with their own ideas, and ultimately came back to bite us. Again, not to blame the victims of this, but to say what really makes vulnerability and what really makes strength. In the Talmud, it said that the Jews attended Achashverosh's feast at the beginning of the story, right? The king, Achashverosh, has this magnificent 180-day feast. Of course, it's not kosher catered. And so the Jews went there in name of their assimilation. They had kind of lost their way and left themselves spiritually vulnerable to attack because they weren't inwardly proud of their own identity and practicing their own faith in a way that allowed them to stand strong when they were ultimately attacked. And one of my favorite commentators on this passage, the Kedushat Levi, says when it comes to this, that he says, remember what Amalek did to you. You were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. He cut down all the stragglers in your rear. He did not fear God. It seems, says the Kedushat Levi, that it is not only for this that the seed of Israel is being commanded regarding the erasing of Amalek, which is from the seed of Esav. Rather, every person in Israel needs to erase the evil part that is concealed in one's heart, that is known by the name Amalek, right? Amalek are not the anti-Semites out there, but Amalek is something deep inside of us. And I've taught this before, and maybe you've heard me teach about it, but it's worth mentioning every Shabbat Zachor. It says this is because whenever the seed of Amalek is found in the world, it is found in the human being, since the human is a small world, and therefore there is a reality to Amalek inside each of us as human beings, an evil force that arises every time to make a human being sin, and is regarding this that the remembrance comes in the Torah, right? Don't remember the people Amalek, but remember what made us vulnerable in the first place. And Rashi points out, the medieval commentator, and the Kedushat Levi, I think, is building on Rashi's comment, that what made them, there's supposed to be a cloud of glory protecting the Jewish people, the Israelites, as they leave Egypt. And here they are stepping outside. How could they be attacked? Well, they've already fallen into sin. They've already lost their way. They've already tried to be like everybody else and forget what makes them beautiful because they're Jewish, what makes them special because of their Israelite heritage. And so the cloud of glory, they slipped outside of it. That's why they're referred to as the stragglers and the famished ones. It's not that they're hungry, it's that they're spiritually empty. And therefore, the Amalek, inside of them or outside of them, however we want to understand it, they were vulnerable to that. This message is so powerful to me. It's powerful to me particularly today, because again, time and again, when Jews are under pressure in the world, it seems to me that we are our own worst enemies, making ourselves vulnerable. And we think if we have a strong nation and we have a strong military, that's going to make us strong. And there is strength in that and responsibility and a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. At the same time, just this week in Israel, there is a bill that's been put forward by the ministers of the Knesset, Maoz and Levin, that is against egalitarian worship at the egalitarian part of the Kotel, right? Many years ago, a compromise was made. There is worship at the kind of Western Wall Plaza that many people are familiar with. But there's also this beautiful area called the Ezrat Yisraeli, I think, like sort of the Israelites Plaza. It doesn't have the same entrance as the traditional Kotel Plaza. It's away from it. Nobody can really see it. And that's a place where egalitarian prayer, in fact, the conservative movement has been running egalitarian prayers. That's men and women together for many, many years there. And showing up for, maybe some of you had celebrated bar bat mitzvahs there. And now this bill that's being put forward is saying that if a woman is wearing a talit or reading the Torah, not only at the regular Kotel Plaza, the sort of traditional Kotel Plaza, but even here at this egalitarian part of the Kotel that's separate, that has a separate entrance, that she could go to jail for 7 years. 7 years for wearing a talis as a woman. This is a matter of Jews from all around the world and many pluralistic Jews in Israel being able to worship in the way that they want. And it reminds me of a time before the October 7th, 2023 attacks that the Jews, again, were infighting in Israel. It doesn't excuse anything. I'm not particularly placing blame. It just seems that we are most vulnerable when we are turned on ourselves. And the consequences can be incredibly dire. I'm recording this on Thursday. It's February 26th, and it is exactly 1 year to the day of the funeral of Shiri Bibas and her beautiful red-headed sons, Ariel and Kfir. And, it seems to me that there was the Amalek from outside that's very easy to point to, that is clearly responsible for the deaths of those beautiful children and so many others in the slaughter of that day. But also, there is shared responsibility of us when we turn on each other and don't treat each other with respect, whether it's at the egalitarian Kotel or whether it's about political parties or whether it's between the diaspora and Israel and the diaspora, that so often the Amalek is deep inside of us, and it ends up having us point our violence at each other. Sometimes our violence at the world. And there's Jews also out there committing attacks in in the areas around the settlements in the West Bank, and all kinds of things that just make us question. None of these seem right. None of these seem good. None of these seem to be pointing of what the Torah wants us to do and to support each other. When the Torah tells us, remember Amalek, to me seems to be all these violent impulses to turn on each other, to turn violently to the outside world without following procedures of justice and the law, and all of that has me so worried these days. And of course, I'm worried about the threats from out there, but I'm even more worried about the threats from inside the evil thing inside each of us, the Amalek that nestles within every Jewish person's heart, within every person's heart, and seemingly within an impulse of the Jewish people to turn on ourselves. And when we do, that's when we end up with stories like the Esther story. That's when we end up with Shushan, with vulnerable Jewish people who turn away from Jewish pride, who fail to learn and be engaged in their Jewish lives in a way that makes them proud and able to express what's special about their Judaism. And in that vacuum comes the attacks. In that vacuum comes the hatred and the inability to stand up, or maybe even the desire to stand up for ourselves. It's Shabbat Zachor. It's time. We need light. We need to support each other. May it be that we take seriously Kol Yisrael Arivim Zeh et Zeh, that each and every person of the people of Israel, each and every Jewish person feels responsible for each other, vis-a-vis responsible for each other, responsible for the mission of Israel to make the world better for everyone, to make it more just, to make it more beautiful, to bring that sense of Kedusha, of holiness into the world, through the Jewish people perhaps, but ultimately to be an Or LaGoyim, a light among the nations. May this Shabbat Amalek and the joy of Purim that follows it remind us that we have the ability to go from dark times, even when there's darkness inside of us, or we fear the darkness inside of us. When we shine a light, that we can bring on the light times, the optimistic times, the times of joy. May we all experience those on this beautiful Purim holiday that starts Monday night, as well as throughout all of our Jewish celebration and joy and pride. Shabbat Shalom.